CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Today, we are meeting with Joel Levitt. A lot of you might know him, but if you don't, first off, he's the president of Springfield Resources. For a long time, he's been around maintenance and reliability, all of this for 4+, heading towards 5 decades. Real deal here. He's a board member at Reliable. If you're not checking out Reliable, get out there on LinkedIn. You can find Reliable Magazine. A lot of good information there in their publication. He's also a trainer. He's also an author for, I'd say, 30+ years, 10+ books. And we're going to get into some of that stuff. We'll try to cover all of it today. But Joel Levitt, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Thanks very much, Greg. Happy to be here. Happy to be anywhere, but happy to be here.
Yeah. It's something we've been working on for a little while. Finally got it scheduled. Finally got ourselves on the same meeting. And first thing I want to ask you about is there's a comic that you're working on. It's called CMMS Friend or Foe, and I want to find out. Now, I've gone through it. I haven't read it deeply, but I've gone through it. I've seen some of the images and some of the captions. What was the impetus of that comic? Like, what inspired you to create that in the first place?
If you ever sat through one of my trainings, I'm a maintenance comedian. I don't feel very funny now, so I cautioned you. I said I'm funnier before 12 than I am, in the afternoon. But I've been writing a lot about maintenance. Like you said, I've got tons of books out, and I decided in the sunset of my life to not write any more boring textbooks. Just like wanted to try something different. So it started during COVID, and I put together a book on defect elimination and kind of told the story as if it was like Odysseus and the Odyssey. And I was very enthusiastic. I know not many other people were, but I was certainly really enthusiastic and started to write a series. And the series has 7 books in it now, and the CMMS book is the 7th. Greg, I was involved in the CMMS. I worked for a company called Costrol, who had a CMMS in 1981. So that puts it back a few years. Somebody with a long gray beard might remember 1981. But it's fascinating to me. And I've tried to keep up with the industry and with what's going on. And, I have a degree in computer science, so I have some background. But the stuff people complain about is not that much different today than it is then. I thought it was funny, so I decided to write this to tell some stories about me and the CMMS and what my clients did and the kinds of questions they asked. And it seems to have struck a chord because it's the best selling of the comic books.
I think when you reference the amount of time you've been around this and how the complaints tend to be essentially the same, maybe with some slightly different, nomenclature or terms, that is the one thing that I'm always kind of thinking about. Like, why does it never change? It's all really the same. They make it way too complicated. I learned about CMMS in probably the late 90s. And, you know, obviously the history, I shouldn't say obviously, the history of CMMS goes back to at least the 60s. And this concept of how nothing's really changed, but everybody makes it so complicated. I want to ask you about that as it relates to the kind of shiny stuff. We've got all these great features and you need this and you need that. And if you don't have your AI or whatever it might be, you just are not playing the game right. And I'm kind of skeptical about a lot of that stuff. I'm a little more than skeptical. I'll go after it, but I want to ask you about that kind of stuff. What hasn't changed? Why hasn't it changed? Why is it so complicated? And talk to us about the shiny stuff.
Well, I love the shiny stuff. So, I have a FLIR One infrared camera for my iPhone because I could afford it and have really no use for it. But I never really met a tool that I didn't like. So that's my standing thing is that. But in the field that we're in, there's only one thing that's different, and it has to do with uh, AI. We've been anticipating AI since I went to school in the 70s. There was a program called ELIZA that was a psychotherapist program that you had a conversation with it on a teletype, and the guy who invented it was a professor, and his secretary started to use it as like a personal therapist. And when she was using it, she would insist that he does not come in the room, that it's private. And like we've been waiting for this like real AI since then, the 2001 Space Odyssey with HAL and
Yeah.
Star Trek and Star Wars and everything. But we're actually in a time when this is actually going to happen. Because I'm sure you have. I've played with ChatGPT, and I'm amazed at. Um, I feed it one of my comic books, and then I ask him to summarize it, and it's a way better summary than I would have done.
Hmm.
Um, I ask it stuff like that, and I know we have friends that use it a lot. I mean, but it's really going to be different when you can take a database of maintenance incidents, and have like an intellect. I'll use that word advisedly. Um, Glean things from it, which may be true or may be hallucinations, but always interesting.
Yeah.
So that's where, that's the thing that's different. The reason why it's been the same is that, we've been collecting the same information, and in the dark past when I started, there was a company called Mainstem that was fleet. I started in the fleet maintenance side, and they had a product where you would mail them your work orders. They would key punch the work orders in and generate reports. But what they did was they had these guys that were like fleet guys that would read the reports before you got them and then make recommendations to you about what you ought to do. Now, that's not artificial intelligence, that's just plain intelligence.
Yeah. Actual intelligence.
Yeah. So these guys, it was like that's the model that I think is, you know, underlying this thing where there'll be some kind of, I'm going to say intelligence, looking at the database and then coming up with, stuff that might be useful to you for reducing downtime or cost or whatever. So that's kind of exciting. of course, the people that are selling it are, super enthusiastic and maybe more enthusiastic than their product justifies at this point. But it's really there now. I mean, it's really, it's you use Siri or Alexa. I don't want to say the name because
Yep.
it'll
It's okay.
wake her up.
Yep.
And that's happening. So I wanted to write this to talk to the maintenance folks. This is not for bosses or engineers even. This is for maintenance folks and the kind of things that gets them like one big thing that gets them about the CMMS everywhere is that uh, I'd hate to say this, but uh, management is not always trustworthy with what they do with the data that they collect in the CMMS. And I've seen that actually happen where they looked at the data, they didn't know what they were looking at, but it looked bad. So they, like kind of disciplined the maintenance guys and they were freaked out. And that was the last accurate data that those people ever saw.
That's interesting. Interesting in that it speaks to the concept of behaviors and how the way you measure or kind of come back at somebody with what they do is going to shape and influence how they behave thereafter, because right there's such a concern and such a kind of a miss on the interpretation of the data. They're like, oh, I'm out. I don't want to get in that kind of trouble ever again. So now I'm going to use it in a way that looks and appears to satisfy their needs so that I don't get any heat.
That's exactly it. And, the second part of it is that there's a prejudice against people in the trades around their use of data. And data is reserved for IT people or engineering or whatever. And, we understand that those people do have training in this, but the guys that do the work understand what's going on in a very deep way a lot of times. And with the data to help them, they would be very, very, on top of things if they really got over that hump.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm a really big believer in having maintenance folks actually use the system on the analytics side, uh, within their capabilities and within their training. But I think that's really going to be a big part of this whole thing because the AI is going to make it so you don't need to know anything about databases. You'll be able to query it, and the thing will look at the database and give you an answer.
Do you think there's any risk of AI used in that fashion creating a type of laziness or languidity around one's willingness to think critically about situations that they're dealing with in maintenance?
Yeah, I mean, some of the science fiction shows the human race in hundreds or thousands of years being a bunch of idiots because they got out of the habit of thinking. um, what can I tell you? That's going to be a risk. But I'm interested in first of all fundamental stuff. I'm not smart enough to be able to keep up with all the stuff that's going on technologically with sensors and everything. I know a little bit about it, but I'm more interested now in the fundamentals of our field and making sure that people know stuff that is, it's almost like hidden knowledge. You can go through an apprenticeship and not learn some really, really basic things that you learn doing it for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I'm interested right now. Is like that's cool. I think that's cool stuff because it's like, oh yeah, that's pretty obvious, but I never thought of that, you know.
Yeah, that's
So yeah,
uh, so. If you think about a lot of the different things in life, whether we're talking about maintenance, liability, asset management, but other areas of life, there's a lot of things that we think we understand that we have in fact learned, but then when you have that discovery moment and it's something that is so fundamental, that kind of aha moment, that's got to be one of your favorite things about instances where you've done training, instances where you're, you know, out on a shop floor, you're walking a plant, whatever it might be, you're engaging with people about one of your books, where that intention that you had was that, hey, don't forget to look over here, this is really fundamental to what you're actually doing, what you're trying to do, and then they get it. That's one of the more rewarding aspects of conversations like this, or getting in there and doing some real training and building somebody up. And I think it'll be interesting to see how even this AI thing can help with that. But the book is really, the comic book in particular is really a part of that as well, because you're talking about frontline workers.
yeah, and we one of the things that I don't know why this happened, but it's certainly true. Um, the knowledge part of maintenance, you know, maintenance is like skills, knowledge, and cojones. Um, like being able to get yourself to do the thing, the skill to do it, and the knowledge of what to do. And the knowledge has been dominated by engineering, properly so. And but it's been very, very dry and boring. So to get knowledge, you have to wade through very hard material. And I'm just afraid that, you know, with the availability of, you know, YouTube and everything else, people don't have tolerance for that. So it's going to be hard to get them to do that. So I really want to start to introduce some humor, some lightness. It's not all heavy, you know. So that's just like it's, you know, it's a quirk. My last name is Levitt, so I'm into levity, you know. So um,
I think it matters. It's, I mean, one, it's refreshing. Um, two, maybe this should have been one. It's different. So you end up with a kind of like a pattern disrupt. It becomes an alternate way to learn, an alternate way to carry forward and pass on knowledge and insights that we all talk about being at risk with, you know, the idea that a lot of folks are going to retire and take all their knowledge with them. And of course, this is another one of these common themes. And I want to bring it back to the CMMS, how that actually versus we say that it becomes that historian that can contain those jewels and those insights. Is that a real thing, or is that a little bit more of a fantasy? Does a CMMS really deliver on, if it's being used and things are being documented, that available information that people need to learn and understand what, you know, Joe or Jill who retired took with them in their brain?
I've seen that happen, so I think it is a real thing. Um, there's one big issue with this with the CMS, and that is the signal to noise ratio.
Mm.
If you look into a database and you see a lot of stuff, it's hard to see which is the signal and which is the noise, um, because it's not really designed to pop out at you. So this is one of the things that more advanced analytics will do, is it'll boost the signal to noise ratio so you can actually see what's going on. Um, I remember I was asked by an airport. This is like, like one of those kind of questions. Which escalators, there's a million escalators in an airport, break down the most? So I said, that's easy. Like we have a CMMS. We know every time it breaks down. So I'll look at that. And I looked at it, and it turned out that you could not distinguish breakdowns from stoppages due to people getting their jacket caught in the teeth that trip the. So the guys go out and they just turn the key and it's fine. Um, there was no way to distinguish between mechanical problems and trips the way they had set things up. So there was lots of noise, but not much signal because I couldn't tell the difference. I'd have to look at each work order and like go through the part if there was parts used. Like you really have to be Sherlock Holmes. And I'm a little lazy, so that was not going to happen. You know, if I couldn't see it, I just told them that was not. It's not worth it to go look that deep. But that's the thing is there. But on the other hand, if you'd had a big rebuild of a machine 10 years ago, and the people who did it are not there, and they kept pretty good records in the CMMS, that will be like a gold mine.
Yes. That's
just their notes, the parts were used, the vendors that were used, all that stuff is like real money.
I think that's one of the areas where when you're deploying and using a CMMS platform, things can, unbeknownst to everybody, even the vendor that's supporting the client that's deploying the system, they don't necessarily know what those blind spots are, but there are some basic fundamentals that will help with that, such as when you're leveraging, well, in reliability, you want to use failure modes, failure codes, so that everything is very contextual. You want some options to build that out. But even in environments where they're not running reliability programs and they're just using it for general facilities and what's happening here, what's happening there, what's not happening, I think there's a tendency for people to not want to explore the layers. So on an escalator or elevator, whatever it is, right? On the escalators, if we have those generalizations, now you've got a heck of a lot more noise. And there's what I think is a simple approach to only slightly improving your documentation style would now create the visibility if a failure or if a work order was issued and it's in a basic categorization of the type of failure, even without a failure code or a failure mode, knowing whether it was operator related or if it was an actual failure, and maybe we add some third component to that.
Yeah, that is so true. Is when you can put it into a box, then you can take that box and stick it over here and not worry about that and just look at the ones that were actually, where the work accomplished code is, repair rather than just reset, something like that.
Yeah, so that they're not cluttering things up. And I wonder there's a lot of folks that have this happening like right now, all day today. It's just been going on. And if they want to go back and fix it, it's an immense undertaking to do that. It might not even be truly possible. That sometimes leads to changes in platforms, or the vendor has to try to build something that's going to trick the system out. I've always wondered if reports aren't the area. I'm a big fan of data not being held hostage in the CMMS, by the CMMS provider. I like clients to have access to it because there are things they might want to do with it that they can't do within the CMMS platform. And that's not a dig on the CMMS platform, because if you can get table data, and I'm no programmer guy or anything like that, I'm just a button clicker, man. Tell me how to do it or find me someone that knows how to make it. But that data might sometimes already exist within the descriptions if proper descriptions of work completion are being done. Is that another area where you think people can sometimes overgeneralize, things like miscellaneous or, work order closeouts that say done, no problems?
Right. The work requested was pump broke, and the work completed was okay now.
Useless.
Right.
The work got done,
So,
which is cool, but how do you improve that?
well, one of the things that um, I talk about a little bit in the comic is this idea of having every field like standardized and what it means and how it's used. If I would query most people that use CMMSs, they would have their own definitions for what those fields are. And there would be no real agreement. And I gave some training for a pharmaceutical company, and they had 13 plants present in this meeting from all over the world. And I asked them something like really, really crazy, like, tell me what like a maintenance request is supposed to do. And these guys like got into like an argument about it. Like they didn't have a fundamental agreement about the simplest thing, what it was supposed to do and what it was supposed to look like. And I'm there like, if that's true, then your data is like completely all idiosyncratic to the plant or to the guy, or you know they the words that they used were different for the same thing in different plants and even in the same plant. So I completely agree with what you're saying. Like, what the way I like to do it is we define every field in the work order that we're supposed to fill out and give them examples of it, and make sure that everybody understands what we want. And then everybody's going to be a little different. But the other thing is that if you ever notice when you have a CMMS for a while and a new person jumps in, gets hired, who trains them? Well, typically the guy next to him trains them.
Right.
Like the person sitting over there trains them. And that person picks up all that person's idiosyncratic, their personal stuff,
Yeah.
That's
Idiosyncratic tendencies.
idiosyncratic tendencies, um, and then they'll add their own, so that 2 or 3 generations later, they're doing something entirely different than what the system was designed for by the people who put it in. So I think that that's like really basic stuff. I mean, again, it's like I'm not talking about like where you need a PhD to understand even the issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is like language one.
These things we talk about with the basics, and what you were explaining about how when somebody new comes in and we get this kind of generational stacking or drift, or like creep, like scope creep or something like this.
Yeah.
That's the advantage of standardization. So I wonder why there's so much resistance to standardization, especially around the CMMS in particular. Whereas with other systems like the CRM or the accounting system, nobody deviates not very much from any of that stuff. And when they do, somebody knows about it very quickly. But that doesn't seem to ever happen with the CMMS. I wonder why.
Well, I think it's the money. People are very, very conscious of real money. And maintenance, nobody ever really understood what maintenance did, traditionally. And maintenance guys liked it that way. You know, I didn't really want the bosses to know what I did because half the time I was screwing around or doing something that I shouldn't have been doing or whatever. So um, you build, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's the nature of it. But here's the thing: everybody who's bought a car has taken their car into the dealer. And if you look at a dealer work order and the amount of detail of the data, like it took 4.3 hours to change the alternator, and the alternator part number is this, and what we found was this. See, that data is worth money. So it tends to be really accurate. And if you can't fill out a work order right in a car dealership, you don't last very long. In an industrial maintenance setting, nobody gives a crap what you put down on the work order. And I've seen, and I'm sure you have too, that people put stuff in work orders and no one ever got back to them and said, what are you doing? In other words, they did what they did and then they wrote what they wrote, and that was the end of it. And one of the things about CMMSs is if you're not actively handling the data, you're never going to know that. And uh, I think I quoted, um, I had a group from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Now, prison maintenance is really interesting because I'll just digress for a second.
Yeah.
The guys, the maintenance managers, use inmates to do some of the work, and they'll get like the only person that can fix this particular thing is going to be like a lock will be one of the inmates who happens to be a locksmith, but he also robs banks,
Yeah.
and the administration is kind of like when he gets to the end of his sentence, they're kind of a little reluctant to let him go because he's really really good at his craft. So, but he said that the CMMS for him was a hog, a pig, and all we did was feed the pig and clean up the pig shit, if I can say that.
Yeah.
You know, and that was the whole system for him was feeding the pig and cleaning up the end,
Yeah.
right? Um, and they never used the data for anything useful.
Well, that's the rub right there is the garbage in, garbage out, and how are we going to improve this? And we have these meetings. Oh, let's do a quick stand up, and everyone's okay. Yeah, we're going to do better. And then maybe they do, and then only to find out, well, nobody's looking at this anyway. So this is just a hassle for me. I just want to get my work done.
Right,
Oh, well, it only takes you 30 seconds to do this. Yeah, but it's too annoying. It bugs me, and you're not going to look at it anyway. So why should I even bother? This has no meaning for me. I don't understand why it's not connected to what we do. But I tell you, if I wanted to spend $10 on something, somebody would come and say, "What are you doing spending money?"
right, right,
And how do we get it really connected to the business? And will it ever really change, or is this going to be a constant fight that some organizations are going to do it better because they're so intentional about it, they've made it meaningful, not as a design but as a reality, or is the majority of instances where CMMS exists always going to be kind of a little bit of a mess this way?
I don't know about the future at all. What I like to do is to build, I'm going to use some words like a protocol into the system, which is a canned process for analyzing something. Now, if you think about when you go to a hospital and you broke your arm, and the X-ray tech takes certain pictures of you, and they set the kVA, the power of the X-ray tube at a certain amount based on how fat you are, right? And they do that. Well, all that is regulated by a protocol that is written by a physicist and a doctor. The physicist worries about the intensity of the beam. The doctor worries about what position to put the arm in. And the X-ray techs, what they do is when they learn how to do X-ray teching, they have a book of protocols, and they if the person comes in with this is the set of pictures they take. Well, I want to do the same thing in the maintenance world for analysis of stuff, where we figure out what to do to analyze it. And then the guys do it. Maybe they get a PM that says, hey, run the component life analysis on that type of pump. Component life analysis might be looking at seals or looking at bearings, right? Component life. And it'll give them the mean time between failures for those items. It'll give them, other things. And then what they'll do is they'll like come to the boss and say, hey, we did the component life analysis, and I think the Ingersoll Rand pumps are way better. We're putting about half of the amount of money into them. Oh, now that's actionable. And it's by a person who, it's like if the guy is the one who shovels the crap up, he's going to have a lot of expertise in doing that. But somebody sitting in an office thinking about the theoretical ramifications is not really going to appreciate not having to shovel that stuff up. That's not going to be like a big concern for them.
Yeah.
So that's the direction I want to go with this. Is let's push the analysis down in the organization. Let's get people. The new guys that are coming out are more sophisticated from a hardware software point of view than we were.
By far.
I mean, they can change the channel on their TV.
Yeah. And this is where we just want to kind of harness that. And I love your idea and the idea that you're going to push for developing that. I want to make sure we hear more about it. I want to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah.
And number one, on the comic, is it already out or is it still being worked on?
No, the CMMS comic is out on Amazon. There's 7 of them. There's defect elimination. There's like a thing on reliability around the idea of tighten bolts, lubricate, and clean stuff, TLC. There's one on PM. I did one on quality that turned out to be a lot about safety. I didn't really think about it, and it turned out that when I was talking about quality, safety is the same conversation. And then maintenance planning is one, and then the CMMS. I think that's all of them.
Yeah, friend or foe. That's the one I was previewing. Thank you for sending that to me, by the way. I'm going to dig into it a little bit more later because I think it's fun. I think it's fascinating in that it still has all the same elements, but it's not so I need a dictionary, or whatever. It's fun. Okay, so for first timers on CMMS radio, you have to suffer through what's called the fun questions segment. And this is just a no wrong answers type of a thing. Now, in your case, I'm going to add a bonus question. So there's 3 fun questions, but there's going to be a fourth. So I want to get this going for you. You ready?
I'm scared.
Don't be scared. There ain't nothing to be scared of on CMMS radio other than the fact that we might say some stuff that's true and talk a little trash. That's what we're all about, is keeping it real. So, no wrong answers here. First fun question. What is your favorite music?
That is hard. When I work, I like to listen to instrumental music. So it could be classical, it could be jazz, but I can't. If there's words in it, I can't concentrate on what I'm doing. But I like, if I'm out listening to music, like blues would probably be the thing that I would listen to.
Very nice. Very nice. Second fun question is, what is your favorite sport or hobby? And on sport, it does not have to be one you play. It could be one you like to watch and root for.
Well, my favorite hobby now is wood. I'm a really, really rank amateur woodworker. And just as a thing, I have this problem. I buy wood, like I like exotic wood, and once I cut up the piece, I can't remember what type of wood it is
Ah,
because there's a name on it that they put on it. But if I cut that piece off, I just have a piece of wood. So I bet this is like the stupidest thing in the world because I should be able to manage that. So I just went like a couple of weeks ago, I took a 3-day course in wood identification. 3 days. And this was a course in wood anatomy. So you could look at a piece of wood and you could see all the different things and see the anatomy. So now I have like a 20% chance of guessing the piece of wood. I'm up from 0% to 20%. Although I'm getting better, I'm reading about it and I literally set up a microscope on my other computer so I could, look at the end grain or look at the radial grain or whatever. So that's my fun thing that I'm doing before dinner. I usually go downstairs early and read, and I'm reading books on wood identification.
all right. All right. Well, that's
I'm,
fun. I
I'm,
mean,
I'm boring,
I don't know if you're interested in it and it's satisfying and you're curious. That's not boring. So I'm a
It is
fan of
so
that.
complicated, though. I have to tell you, Greg, it is like off the wall. There's hundreds of patterns that you have to memorize that distinguish, you know, pine from hemlock.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite wood?
Well, I love rosewood.
Okay.
It's a rare wood, so it's something you can't. Most of the rosewood is not really rosewood anymore because they harvested most of it, and it's now illegal to cut a tree. But my father did woodworking, and he built a rosewood table that I have now, and it's it warms the cockles of my heart
All right.
to
All
see it.
right. I like it. I like it. Third fun question. This is typically the big one. No wrong answers here. What is your philosophy or perspective, anything at all, when it comes to the concept of work life balance?
My work life balance is that I work a little bit every day, 365 days a year, and that's what I like to do. I don't like to work. I'm not one of these people that likes to work like 17 hours or any of that stuff. I had some of that in my youth, but um, now if I can work for 3 hours, I usually get up early, so I'm like at the desk at 6, and um, I can put in 3-4 hours and I can do like a day's work, and then from that point onward I can live. But I don't distinguish it. I love working. I really do. And my friends are retiring, and I don't see why I would do anything different from what I'm doing.
That's good. I like it. And it's why I say there's no wrong answers with any of this stuff, especially this one. It's interesting. It resonates somehow with somebody and gets them thinking. But for you, I got one more question, kind of putting you on the spot here.
Okay.
Can you tell us a quick maintenance joke?
Well, the thing is, in the comic books, I put jokes in all the time, and I sometimes have to research them, and I can't think of anything right now. But
Yeah.
I don't think the CMMS books, I don't think I did much of that because there was so much material that I already used up all my words on the actual material in it.
Well,
That had, probably twice the number of words of any of the other comics.
yeah. Well, Joel Levitt, thank you very much for being here with me on CMMS Radio finally, and for sharing some of your journey and your insights. And we'll make sure we point people in the direction of the comic book series because it's a fun way for people to learn. Thanks for being on CMMS Radio.
Yeah, thanks.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit cmmsradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.